love. There you go.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. We are so excited to have Dr. Izquierdo with us, and we're really, really excited that you've joined us. If you're with us live or if you're viewing later on at a different time, we're just happy you're with us. Let me just give you a few logistics. My name is Valentina Gonzalez, and I'm one of the educational consultants for Seidlitz Education. We are recording this presentation, and if you've registered, you'll receive the recording in about 24 to 48 hours, and we'll also upload it to our Seidlitz Education website. And in addition to that, please chat with us in the chat field if you're live. Just be sure that you're chatting to panelists and all attendees. So right above where you chat, you can kind of click on that little blue bar and change it so it says panelists and everyone, or panelists and all attendees. And if anything should happen, Zoom failure or whatever, please join up with us on the Seidlitz Education website where we'll give you more information about what to do to connect with us. I'm going to slide it on over now to Anna Mattis.
Good. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. It is my very, very sincere honor and pleasure to introduce to you guys today, not only my dear colleague, but one of my dearest friends, Dr. Michelle Izquierdo. If you don't know Michelle, she is Seidlitz Education's premier expert and consultant on culturally responsive teaching and making content comprehensible for our secondary learners. That is her background. Michelle has devoted her entire career to supporting new arrival immigrants. In fact, it's what she wrote her doctoral dissertation on. Now, I've had the distinct pleasure of reading that dissertation about 3 times in my life because it became the foundation of her book, Pathways to Greatness, which you're going to be getting a lot of wonderful gems from today. So without further ado, here is Michelle.
Oh, thank you, friend, for that lovely introduction. And those of you who don't know, my friend Anna just took time out of her day with her 2-month-old baby and to come and join me today and do that introduction. So friend, thank you so much. I know there's probably 1,000 other things you should be doing right now, baby related. So yes, guys, I'm super excited to be here. I think in coming up with the topic that I felt was timely and necessary, this idea of what do we do with our lessons? How do we make our lessons comprehensible? And maybe we were really awesome and amazing at that. And then COVID-19 happened and our world was literally turned upside down, figuratively, literally turned upside down. So maybe even if we had a solid skill set with some of these ideas, what do we do with these new challenges that present themselves? So I think for a lot of us, we're thinking, man, I kind of feel like I did as a baby teacher, right? Trying to relearn some of these tasks. So my title is Comprehensible Input in the Time of COVID. There's my social media information as well that Anna presented to you, and welcome. So as Anna said, many of the tidbits of information I'm providing today come from my book, Pathways to Greatness for All Newcomers. And I'm going to reference this book because many of you already have this book. So I just kind of wanted to let you know where some of this information is found if you have a copy of the book. So with that being said, let's, go ahead and throw your answers in the chat. And I also want you to know that my lovely friends and colleagues, Valentina and Anna, are manning the chats. If you have any questions, please put those up there. And Anna and Valentina, if it's something super important, we need to just totally interrupt me. We'll chat about it. I mean, obviously this is, official webinar, but I also want it to be real casual in terms of getting your needs met. So by all means, if you have a question, please give us a shout. So really quick, I want you to ponder. Everybody ponder for me real quick. What COVID-19 aside and the classroom issues aside that we're dealing with right now, what do you do when you can't rely on language as your primary means of communication? And this could even be if you've traveled to Italy and you need something, but no one around you speaks English and your Italian is not that great yet. What are some things that you might do to get your point across when you're trying to communicate with someone? And I'm just going to read all these beautiful answers. Yes. Nonverbal hands that point a lot. Yes. Gestures. Facial facial expressions. Hint, hint. Content to come. That's foreshadowing, ladies and gentlemen. universal gesture symbols. I love it. Simona, draw, sing, act, pantomime, dance, moonwalk, light yourself on fire. Right. Actually, anything, hand signals. Okay. So that's just kind of gives you an idea of where we already are in terms of comprehensible input. And so I'm just going to, this is not a theoretical session over what comprehensible input is, but I'd be remiss if I didn't define that term for us. So comprehensible input is our lovely and scholarly Stephen Krashen tells us is a written or spoken message that our beautiful children understand because we've provided them with context. So that's basically the gist of it. I understand a message because you've provided me with context. So I'm going to back up for a second here and take you back 20 years ago to baby teacher, high school biology Michelle, when I went to a training on sheltered instruction and they kept saying, okay, you got to provide context. Well, I'm thinking, what do they mean by context? Because my prior knowledge of context was like context clues, right? Your language arts teacher from high school telling you to use your context clues. So I'm thinking, how does that work in a science class? Or what do you mean by that? So I struggled with, what do you mean by context? Because my schema or my prior knowledge of context was with language arts, right? So we also hear things like, can you put that in context for me? Or I don't understand what you mean out of context. So this whole in and out of context and putting things into context. So for the rest of our little time together, I want you to think of the word context to mean clues, extra information. So what clues or extra information are we providing our lovely, beautiful students to help them comprehend the lessons better? So that's kind of what our frame is going to be. So in a nutshell, when we're teaching, whether it's remotely or online or some hybrid in between, and we know the world changes on a daily basis, we don't know where we're going to be in a few weeks from now. So whatever your classroom situation looks like, the challenge that we have for our English language learners is them trying to make sense of content or of information in a language they don't understand, or in a language that is a second language to them. But I also want to point out, and if you've heard me train in person, you've heard me say this a lot, that this is not just about English learners. I would argue that especially when we start getting up into those upper grade levels, when we start using very rich, rigorous, the lexicon of our content area. So if I'm standing up there and I'm delivering a lecture on protein synthesis or cellular respiration, there's a really good chance I'm going to be using a lot of vocabulary that my English speaking kids don't understand. So framing this in such a way that we look at academic English as a second language for all of our students. So now the challenge becomes all of our students are trying to understand content in a language they don't understand. So if we frame it like that, then we have to add this other layer. So how has that challenge been compounded by COVID-19? So there's a couple of places I want to talk about here, because I know many of you, depending on where you're chiming in from around the country, you have students at home. Likely you still have a number of students at home learning virtually. You also might have students in person in your classroom, or if you're super lucky, you have a little bit of everything, right? And then who knows what's going to happen after Thanksgiving, or, again, we're going day by day and week by week. So let's talk about some challenges specifically presenting themselves as a result of COVID-19 with our face-to-face kiddos. And so first of all, we're all wearing masks now, right? So I'd got my hair done. And by the way, if you missed the behind the scenes, we were talking about my hair. I got my hair done recently, and I'm in the chair and my stylist is working on my hair. We're both speaking English. It's not particularly loud in the room. We both have masks on, and y'all, for real, I caught myself nodding and smiling a lot during that 2 hours because I couldn't understand what she was saying. And it dawned on me, wow, I never realized prior to wearing a mask everywhere how much I depend on watching people's faces. So it's absolutely a challenge muffling speech. So I can kind of hear you, but I can't make out the sounds that you're making totally, the gist of the message. And forget about the fact that many of our kids are trying to make sense of a foreign language. And then again, I can't see your mouth. I can't see your face. And I thought this was a very interesting and my little sort of side interest I have in researching body language and things. And this citation's actually at the end of the slides if you're interested. This Murphy in 2020 said in her book that nonverbal cues make up 55% of the emotional content of a message. And I thought, wow, so take out 55% of the message that you're trying to communicate to someone. And I think that's an actually distinct challenge that many of us are facing right now. I read an article recently that said, in fact, this is what I thought about when we first went to virtual learning and then back face-to-face with masks, what students would be mostly impacted by this. Of course, it's our deaf ed students. It's our English language learners. It's possibly our autistic students who rely on facial expressions and body language. There's certainly a large population of students who are going to be affected with this issue of wearing masks. Okay, so we're going to address some of these concerns, but let's talk about the other kiddos we have that are at their houses now learning virtually. So let's compound the fact that you're still wearing your mask, plus they're watching you on a computer screen from their houses, so they're losing the context and the clues of the classroom. They can't see your word wall anymore. They can't see your anchor charts anymore. They can't see your sentence stems anymore. And yeah, you might flash some of these sentence stems or some of these pieces in your PowerPoint or during your lesson when you're presenting with the students. But a lot of times in classrooms, students rely on looking around the room for those clues, for that context that's going to increase understanding. And any other visuals you have around, maybe it's a model. So you combine all of that with the fact that there's already this huge challenge of making sense of language. So basically what I want to cover in the time we have together is I want to characterize just in general what a good lesson is when you maximize comprehension using some of these contexts, these clues and these extra tips and tricks. And then I want to layer that with some other information that might address some of these challenges that we just spoke about. And obviously there's probably a lot of other ideas. I kind of just sort of went out and curated based on some articles and some other research that I've read that I thought would be useful and very practical. That's one thing I like to give practical information, because I know the last thing any teacher wants right now is a lot of things that are not going to be immediately impactful to their instruction. So just a quick list. I'm going to go through this quickly. You have this in your PowerPoint slides that I'm assuming will be posted for someone to access later. We know providing visual cues, pre-COVID, not COVID, after COVID, this is still best practices. Students need to see what you say. Anytime we can provide a picture or gesture, use our body language, any of that to provide that visual input. We also we think about how do we access or provide relevant background information. And I'm going to talk about a couple of these individually here in just a minute. How do we tap into relatable experiences? This is really significant to our English learners. How do we emphasize key vocabulary? Maybe in the classroom, it's our word wall. But again, what does that look like if my kids are learning virtually? Providing opportunities for students to interact. Y'all, I can do a whole training on utilizing breakout rooms and things like that in Zoom to make sure you're still allowing for that interaction. And I know this is a challenge in person as well. As a consultant, I've had to revamp my own trainings where I'm highly interactive to what that now looks like when my participants are in person but required to be socially distant. And then things like teaching cognates and teaching morphemes. And I think Anna mentioned it. I'm a former high school content area science teacher. So this idea of teaching cognates and morphemes, prefixes and suffixes is not just something we would do in language arts. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well too. And then of course, our first language support. But let's do some specific examples here, because we're like, tell me what to do on Monday, right? Just tell me what to do on Monday. So I heard this idea when I was a baby teacher, make the content relevant, make those connections. And I think possibly because I was just really overwhelmed as a first year, second year, third year teacher, especially with my newcomers, that I never really thought specifically what this might look like in my lesson. So I'm going to give you some just really specific examples. So let's say I'm teaching geography and I'm teaching landforms. Instead of showing them the generic picture of the plateau or the generic picture of a mountain, I know I have a child from India, or whatever countries. I literally Googled this yesterday, famous landforms around the world. And so, for example, here's the Deccan Plateau in India. So if I have a student from India, this will be very, very relevant to them, and they'll recognize this. And I think that's the point of connecting with students. We want them to recognize pieces of themselves in our content. And if I'm a newcomer especially, everything is so new to me. This one fleeting moment in time when I look up and I recognize something is very powerful. So what about, in my content area, food chains and food webs? Always just went with the example in the textbook. And down here in Texas, the textbook industry is a really big deal. And so I'd use the Texas horned-toed lizard eats this and this and that. Well, it didn't take me long to think, man, why am I using examples from Texas? Which that's great. Obviously I want my students to be introduced to the content from their new country, but how cool would it also be if I used some examples from their own country? So this is a Latin America, the grass and the capybara and then the caiman. So again, it's about a student in class recognizing pieces of themselves in your content. And this last one's a little bit cliche, the whole Johnny had 5 apples, right? Why does Johnny always have to have 5 apples? Why can't Ben have 5 rambutans? Y'all know what that is? Can I just tell you that I got some of these in my imperfect food box yesterday, and it was super fun. Of course, my kid's like, Mom, what's with the hairy strawberries? So, what's cool about this, and this is just kind of an aside, part of that cultural connection. If I'm Ben and I'm in your class and I see a picture of a rambutan, I'm the only one that knows what that is. So there's this sense of pride for that fleeting moment that I actually know something the other kids don't. And I don't think a lot of our English learners have that opportunity to feel that way. And really all it took me as a teacher is a few minutes on the Google machine, on the interweb thingy, looking up some stuff that's relevant to my kiddos. And no, you don't have to, make it fit every one of your students all of the time, but just take these opportunities whenever you can to infuse and layer your content with examples the kids can relate to. So that's pretty much the goal there. There's something else that I think we do really well in language arts, but not so well in the other content areas. And I definitely think it's a missed opportunity. One of the TEKS standards here in Texas, or one of the standards I see in the Common Core curriculum or whatever content you use or curriculum you use, is this idea that in language arts, we talk about self-to-text connections. We actually have kids reflect. How does this relate to you? How can you identify with this? And I don't think we do that as purposely in other courses. So why is this just something we do in language arts? So even if I'm not providing these specific content connections with my students as part of the metacognitive, there's that big fancy teacher word we hear all the time, as part of my teaching students how to think, I might ask them, I didn't provide a specific example relevant to you, but can you think of an example relevant to you? So having those reflective opportunities built into a lesson so that kids can reflect and see if they can make connections on their own. And then you can obviously take that a step further and have them share out those connections. There's a lot of things we can do with that particular piece. Also, once again, something we tend to do in language arts, maybe not so much in other content. Certainly in an ESL class, I see this. I think this is a missed opportunity for us as well, is teaching cognates. I think it's really important for every student in every class to know the working definition of a cognate. Listen, y'all, it's just 2 words that sound the same or similar in both languages. And there's probably a real fancier definition, but for the purposes of communicating that to my kiddos. And then there's lots of things you can do with this. Here's a statistic from Colerain, Colorado. This link is also in your references. 30 to 40% of the words in English have a related word in Spanish. Now, okay, that's not going to help you with your beautiful baby from China, but we put this idea in our toolbox and we pull it out and use it with the students that it will work with. So I think this is really important that students know what a cognate is and make it a habit of identifying cognates, because that's going to lower that affective filter if I'm learning English to realize, man, I actually do know a lot more words in this word problem than I thought I did. And a quick Google search, just again to show everyone the ease at which you could even find some of this information on the internet. I Googled science cognates, I Googled math cognates, I Googled social studies cognates, and I found these great, just quick charts among lots of other visuals when I looked up that particular piece of information. So definitely cognates is something that we can work on. And related to that is teaching morphemes. Now, I know the word morphemes is a linguistic term, like when you study linguistics. And if I'm just being honest with y'all, I had no idea what a morpheme was until I took my ESL certification class. Because when you get a degree in marine biology, nobody's telling you about this vocabulary like morphemes and phonemes. And the only thing I knew about phonemes is I'm hooked on phonics and it worked for me. Anyone? Okay, moving right along. So I called them prefixes and suffixes when I was a teacher, and I actually did this as part of my beginning unit in high school biology, because it didn't take me long to figure out intuitively as a young teacher that many of my academic vocabulary words in my science class were the students' common words in their language. And of course, I know now because Latin and Greek roots and all of that. But I think definitely taking advantage of prefixes and suffixes. And this is another metacognitive strategy, teaching students to think. Because if I don't know the word, if I know some of the word parts, then I can at least figure out what the word means. And once again, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead here. So if you do have Pathways to Greatness, there is some information about this particular subject, teaching morphemes, in the book, as well as some activities that you can use. So I just wanted to, again, give that shout out. If you own a copy of the book, there's some great information in there about morphemes. And I also have in the appendix a very lengthy list of morphemes, prefixes, suffixes, and Latin roots. And if you don't have the book, I Googled it again. Prefixes and suffixes, but I was content specific. So I looked up morphemes for science and did a good Google search on that and came up with this beautiful list. And this is just a screenshot of it. I get the same thing, morphemes, prefixes, and suffixes in math. So you can definitely find some lists that are content specific. Social studies. I mean, I can keep going. I looked it up for music because I know a lot of elementary teachers teach music, or that might be an elective for the student. So whatever content you teach, if you Google some of these ideas with your specific content plugged in, there's a wealth of resources out there. And that this is just all random free stuff I found. Let's not even talk about all the teacher pay teacher stuff. And I know we all have different opinions regarding teacher pay teacher, but there's some really good stuff out there if you're willing to kind of go through it and look for it. So certainly if there's a resource for 75 cents, it's going to save me a lot of time online. But my point is, before you start creating some of these things on your own, go out there and see what's there. With the overarching umbrella that we're providing context. Remember, that's our whole point in this webinar today. And then without going into great detail, I'm of course a huge fan of foldables and graphic organizers, anything that we can do to make the learning visible to our students. And I don't think we necessarily think why this is such a great strategy for our English learners. For example, if I'm learning the characteristics of something and there are 4 characteristics, I'm having a really hard time with the language right now, but by golly, I know there's 4 of them because there's 4 flaps on my foldable, or there's 4 squares on my graphic organizer. So I think that's the connection that we make with foldables and graphic organizers, is that kids can see pieces of content. And I think that's really, really powerful. Along those same lines are making learning visible. I already mentioned word walls, anchor charts, content posters. What I mean by content posters, I mean the fancy things that you buy at the teacher supply store that are already prefabricated. I see a lot of those in classrooms, and I think to make those more valuable to you, you could even take note cards and a Sharpie marker or a Mr. Sketch marker. You know, it has to be Mr. Sketch because you want to like smell blueberry while you're making your visuals. Anyone? Okay. Your content posters, and you can actually add more labels to the posters that you buy at the teacher supply store, and then that makes them more relevant to maybe what you're teaching. And lastly, maybe it's my anal retentive math science brain, but color coding things, grouping things, organizing things in a very purposeful way so that visibly can help kids make sense. So for example, if I have my word wall up in elementary, I know we tend to alphabetize word walls because our kids are learning to read and that's the best way to find a word. But as we move up in those grade levels, upper elementary, middle and high school, my word wall needs to be grouped in some kind of logical manner. So again, an example from science, if I have all my vocabulary up on the wall related to DNA and RNA, maybe I'm going to put all the words in purple that are related to DNA, all the words in red that are related to RNA, and then another color if they're applicable to both of them. So again, my kids look up there and say, you know what, I don't know what all those red words mean, but I know they're related because they're all in red or they're all over here on this part of the wall. And then anything that you can do to provide visual cues in your class. Even before the kids show up, ask yourself, what can I do so kids see what I say? And I think if we always have that mindset and that reflective piece, we'll go further in terms of increasing the comprehensible input. And with that being said, again, before you start stressing about, oh, what is this anchor chart going to look like? Y'all just Google it. I'm telling you, I am not an artist. But I'd love to draw, if that makes sense. I'm not great at it, but if you give me any of these like example anchor charts that you see on the screen now, I could totally recreate those. So that's what I'm about. Like, find something that's already beautiful and out there and just recreate it. Then you don't have to necessarily do that planning piece. And there's some really great ideas. And these are just a few. And again, if you guys are secondary and you're listening to me and you don't know the power of an anchor chart, there are many things, even on the screen, like branches of government, the scientific method. There's that read and reflect. So metacognition, I'm thinking, I'm wondering, all of these are great. So I just Googled it and did a screenshot of some anchor charts there. Along the same lines of making learning visible, thinking about your objectives. And this is whether I'm presenting objectives on a screen, if my kids are learning at home, or even on my whiteboard in my class, color coding objectives. I went as far in my classroom as to create signs that said content objective, that said language objective. My content objective sign was blue. My language objective sign was green. And then as a team, shout out South Houston High School, Pasadena ISD, as a team, we all had the same colored signs in our classroom. So now, not only do we have visual cues or visual clues in one class, but those same visible clues are being used throughout a student's day. And we know all the research says at-risk students benefit when they have some consistency throughout their day. So just these little tips and tricks don't require a lot of planning on your part, but providing visual cues. So here's an example of color coding the objectives. The verb is in blue, the academic task is in red, and then we took it a step further and we can annotate these objectives. So again, it's about visible visual cues for learning. So now let's regroup and back up a little bit, because all of these things were best practices regardless of the teaching environment we find ourselves in. But let's talk about some remote learning ideas. Now, I also want to give out, I'm going to go over here and watch her. Oh, she's not on screen. My colleague, Anna Mattis, coined this term, friend. I don't know if you know that you're famous here. We had a group training as a company, and Anna jokingly and passing said something about the mothership document. And I was like, oh my God, I'm totally using that, because I'm a total science nerd and I watch a lot of Star Trek and a lot of alien movies. And I thought, that's what I'm going to call this document that I use. So if you've been to my trainings in the last few months, you know that I always say I totally stole this from my colleague, Anna Mattis. So now you know. But what is the mothership document? You love it. I know, right? The mothership document. Well, let's talk about why this is necessary. I'm going to be real honest with y'all. The first time as a company, we started doing some Zoom trainings. I was that teacher that's like, okay, wait, where's this? Everybody's watching a video. Where's the video we're supposed to be watching? And I'm like texting my colleague, hey, where's the video we're supposed to be watching? And I was completely lost. And I'm not a slacker. I just was lost. And the next thing you know, we're over here and we're looking at this, or we're over here on a Padlet. And I'm like thinking, oh my gosh, how am I this confused? And apparently there was some email last Tuesday, one of the 20 emails we got that had a link to some. And I was like, whoa, wait a second. This is what my participants are going to feel like in a training. More importantly, this is what our beautiful children are going to feel like when we're teaching remotely and we have a PowerPoint and then we're going over here to Padlet and then we're going over here to Seesaw and we're linking this. It's overwhelming. So I thought I need a way to organize everything, like one-stop shopping, right? So I call it the mothership document, but all it is a Google Doc. It's a central location. And in that particular document for a particular 6-hour training, I put any links to anything else I'm going to utilize that day, whether it's another Google Doc that people are going to go to and write on, whether it's Google Slides, a Padlet, if we're going to watch a video, if we're going to read a text, whatever I'm going to use that day for training, I put it in this main document. And I call it the mothership because I always say, if you get lost, go to the mothership. So what does this document do? It organizes all of my components of learning for the day. And it doesn't, it's to alleviate the overwhelmingness, is that a word, that our students feel, or even my participants feel in a staff development. And I think this is a really crucial point for you to consider, especially if you're one of those teachers that tends to use a lot of the latest and greatest bells and whistles, and you have your students visiting multiple sites and using multiple apps. You need a way to organize all that information in one place. I use a Google Doc. You can totally use Padlet. There are lots of other things. My other colleague, Dr. Fleener, he calls it the workspace document. So the name of his is much more professional, right? But it's this idea that it provides a home base. So I always tell people, if you get lost, go to the mothership document, go to the home base, and that will link you to wherever else you need to be. And I think this is really important. Why is this important for our learners? Many of our students are going to get the support for remote learning once they're not on Zoom anymore. Maybe they're at home with mom and dad at night. Maybe they're at home with grandparents. Whoever's supporting our children and while they're learning remotely, as a parent, I can tell you I would appreciate the fact that there's this one spot that organizes everything my kiddo has to do for you. But wait, there's more. It's like a Ginsu knife commercial. But wait, there's more. Remember I told you about these beautiful children that are at home learning, that no longer have the benefit of seeing the word wall, of seeing the anchor chart, of seeing sentence stems? Well, you could actually put all of that in your mothership document as well. So the mothership document, in addition to linking all of these things, is also going to now take the place of your whiteboard at home. So what else am I going to put in there? I'm going to put in my content and language objectives for each unit or for each lesson, whatever that's going to look like for you. I'm going to also put in there my key vocabulary. So no, you don't have the word wall that you can look up and see, but you know what, students, the key vocabulary is in your mothership document or whatever you end up calling it for your class. I can also put in my sentence stems. So those same sentence stems that are over on the wall that my kids in class can look at and see, now my remote learners can look in their mothership document and reflect on those stems. I can actually take my camera and take a picture of my anchor charts that I have in my classroom and insert those into the document as well. So here's just a screenshot of my mothership document that I used for a training recently. I did a high yields training for speaking and writing for remote learning. You can see if you're my participants, you click here for your slides. Again, color coding visual. All my links are yellow. All my sentence stems are blue. So even when I'm teaching adult learners, I try to think about all these visual cues that I would use if I was teaching regular students. I have my content objectives. I have my language objectives, and I have any breakout rooms activities. I have my anchor chart, if you will. So this is an example of what this might look like in your class. But again, it's this one place to organize all of your teaching tools for that lesson or for that unit, however you want to decide what that's going to look like. So now I want to take you through like just a quick checklist, if you will, of planning a lesson regardless. So again, we're kind of backing up to regardless of our teaching circumstances, whether it's remote, whether it's in person, or whether it's a hybrid. And I'm showing you these slides because you'll have access to them later and you can kind of use it as like a checklist. And this again comes from my Pathways to Greatness book on creating comprehensible lessons. So why do I like checklists? Because it's that math science brain of mine, right? Like I'm just like, put in a checklist. I need to check my boxes. I need a systematic approach to planning my lessons. I want to check things off as I go. So the first thing you got to do is identify your objectives. And I know you're thinking, what, Rudy? Absolutely. You got your TEKS. If you're down here in Texas, you've got Common Core, whatever state you're in, whatever your curriculum is. I need you to distill those objectives down to the highest degree of specificity that you can come up with. And why is that important? Because I live and die by my objectives. My objectives are so important to me as a trainer. They were equally as important to me as a teacher. I think when we have a paradigm shift with regard to objectives, that we really see them as our primary tool of communicating with our students exactly what the expectations are. So the more specific we can be with those, the better, or the more able, I guess is the word I'm looking for, our kids would be in terms of asking themselves, okay, wait, was I able to do that or was I not able to do that? So after we identify our objectives, what's our key vocabulary? If we're in our classrooms, we're going to prep the word wall, right? We're going to plug those vocabulary words into our mothership document. I'm also going to research and plan. Don't spend 18 hours, but it doesn't take you long on Google to find some of those content connections that I gave you an example of, like the Rambutans for the word problem or the plateau in India. So research and plan for those connections with your students. And as a side note here, and this is probably a whole nother webinar for another day, this means you got to actually know your students and a little bit about their home countries or whatever they're from, or any other things that you can tap in and maximize that knowledge. We're also going to create our visuals. We're going to Google our anchor charts. We're going to get our Mr. Sketch markers, and we're going to start creating those. We're going to look at our sentence stem. So a lot of stuff happens in the planning process to create effective lessons for English learners, or for any students for that matter, if you want that comprehension to be really high. Adapting a text is another subject for a very long webinar, I guess. If you need information about adapting a text, please shoot me an email. I can send you that. I'm going to adapt a text, or better yet, I'm going to find a text already adapted for whatever content I'm going to teach. And this is not just language arts, guys. I mean, you know, as a science person, I can go and find a text on symbiosis, which is the content for a 9th grade biology student, but I can find it and even reduce the readability so that it's on a 2nd grade reading level. So my kiddos are still reading about symbiosis, but I can adapt it so that it's easier to read. And I can send you a systematic way to do that as well. It's just beyond the scope of our day to go into too much more detail about that. And then of course, I'm going to plan for native language support. So any of those pieces are important. You can use that as a checklist. This is an important piece as well. Many of our newcomers, or English learners in general, have the accommodation of extra time. And I think it's really important to consider putting that extra time at the beginning of the lesson. So this is really important. To me, one of the best or most effective things we can do is front load. So what I would do, and I'll show you an example in a minute, you just collected all of this great information and you have this great lesson planned for your children. So provide your students ahead of time before they're in front of you learning, whether it's on a computer or in your classroom. Give them a unit mapper outline with clear objectives. And this is something I did before COVID-19, and I'm going to show you an example in just a minute. Give them that adapted text. Give them that accessible text. Maybe you're not giving it to them, but it's a link to a website where they can go to and read about this particular piece of content, whether it's in English, basic English, or in their home language. You might consider recording yourself. Now, I know I'm dating myself here, but if I wanted to record myself way back in the day, y'all, I had to like go to the library and check out the tape recorder. Anybody remember those days? And now all I got to do is pick up my phone and hit record, and I can record an MP3 file of me reading a text or reading a paragraph or even reading through my PowerPoint notes so my kids can hear that. Again, access to native language, whether it's a website or a text. Anything else? You're going to watch a video in class, make sure your kiddos get that link ahead of time so they can watch that video and slow it down and rewatch it and turn on closed captioning. So if I'm that kid, I'm already going to have seen this video 5 times before I even get to class that day. So here is something I want to show you. This is 2 pages from my Pathways to Greatness book. And these 2 pages were not created for the purposes of my book in 2017. This is actual text from baby teacher Michelle circa 2002, or I don't know, 2003, because intuitively I realized that if I could give my students things ahead of time, so this sort of unit outline is one that I created for every unit that I taught. And you know, again, this is not perfect because this is lots of years ago, but you can see my kids got those distilled objectives, very specific. They also got the vocabulary that was previously taught that's going to come back up. They got their new vocabulary, and they got an outline, a basic outline of the content for what we were going to be studying for the next week and a half. So I've collected all that. I've given all that to my kiddos, and now I'm going to start teaching. And just really quick, best practices as I'm teaching, and I'm going quickly through this. This is any of these bullets could be several minutes explanation, but just as a little sampling or a checklist, if you will. Are you checking consistently for understanding? And I would say soliciting specific feedback. So this idea, does everybody understand, is not as effective as, okay, tell me one thing that you need me to clarify for you tomorrow. Monitor teacher language, your rate of speech, how fast you're talking, your use of idioms, If I could just tell you super quick, I was on the phone with my husband this morning and I was talking about something that didn't go so well. And I said it was a train wreck. And my 5-year-old, after we got off the phone, looked very puzzled and was like, Mama, a train wrecked? My kid loves trains, by the way. So I had a little lesson on idioms this morning because I had to explain to him that no, baby, there wasn't in fact a train that wrecked. And he looked quite puzzled, but whatever. I just thought that was a fun story because I'd already planned to talk about idioms today, right? And then I already mentioned that metacognitive reflection with stems and prompts. We have just a couple of more slides left. So some things you can do after the lesson. Okay, make copies of notes from other students. Again, if this is whether you're in person or real life or remotely, you could potentially take some notes from a native speaker or a more proficient English learner. So now your kids can take the stuff that you gave them, the stuff that they created while they were listening to you, plus the stuff another student created, so we can actually triangulate our learning now with these different sources of information. And you can see that any of these pieces alone is not going to make a huge difference. But when you put all of these things together, you get some impact. So I think when I talk about meeting the needs of English learners or newcomers, it's not one thing that you do, but rather it's a number of smaller things. Other videos you didn't watch in class, but you still think are great, send those to the kids as well. Now, let's take a couple of, let's sort of wrap things up here towards the end and talk about another piece of meeting the needs of these remote learners that I think is important. Or I'm sorry, we already talked about these kids. Let's talk about some more issues regarding the muffled speech and the mask related to all of the things that we just talked about, because your but Michelle might be, okay, all that stuff is great, but Michelle, my kids are in front of me and we're all wearing masks. So here's a couple of more challenges that we're going to talk about how to meet these challenges. And again, guys, some of these might not be appropriate for you. Take them all, put them all in your toolbox, pull them out when they're appropriate or if they're appropriate. I love this idea of an alternative to cloth masks. I don't know about you, but is anybody else like completely obsessed with people's masks? Like, I love the fact that it's terrible that we have to wear these masks, but I like watching people express themselves via their mask. So this idea that you can find an alternative to the cloth. So I love the Google machine. I Googled clear face masks. So not the shields, because I don't know what the stipulations are for your face covering. So for example, I had to fly yesterday and Southwest Airlines actually required an actual mask. So there was a couple of people that had a shield on and they had to switch it out for a mask. So I thought these were cool. These were just clear. I found them on Etsy or something, these clear masks. And because again, our students are watching our mouths. And one teacher wrote a blog and said her intent is just to at least wear these the first few weeks as she gets to know her kids. Here's another idea. If you're in a mask all day, every day, record yourself at home without your mask on, smiling, talking to your kids, even if it's just for a few seconds. So you can show that video to them in class so they can see what you look like without your mask. And this is a tip that I got from an article about pediatric nurses. So pediatric nurses who wear masks for a living all of the time are now sharing tips with teachers who are working with students on how they sort of meet the needs of their kids in a mask. And I think this is important. You can record a video of yourself if you're pronouncing. It's a pronunciation lesson or vocabulary lesson of you just pronouncing the words so that students can watch how your mouth moves, how your tongue moves, how your lip moves. Related to that, post a picture, or better yet, wear a picture. Like, y'all, not your picture you took for your school ID in 1988, like a big beautiful picture of you smiling so that your kids can always look at that picture while they're looking at you and your mask. Again, just reminding them that there's a human face behind that mask. I already said recording a video, but maybe it's maybe you do your daily greeting. Maybe you do a video of you reading your objectives every day. But in any case, kids can see you in some point without your mask on. And then y'all practice smiling with your whole face. Your eyes smile. I don't know if you realize this. Your eyes crinkle when you smile. Jimmy Buffett says the wrinkles only go where the smiles have been, right? So I hope I have crow's feet in a few years, because that means I spend a lot of time smiling. Use a microphone. I know you're thinking, dude, there's only 20 kids in my class. I promise you, use a microphone. You don't realize it, but you're actually straining your voice more, trying to make yourself be understood through a mask. Plus, it makes your speech clearer if there's a microphone. Even if it's just a little cordless microphone, even if you have just 20 kids in your class, I think considering a microphone would be really good. And be even more diligent with a couple of more things. Clear speech. Remember, your speech is going to be muffled through that mask. So exaggerate when you enunciate. Be very crisp and very clear. And then again, even more so, provide visual cues as much as possible. And I want to end with one more quick note. Consider the accommodations. This is sort of like the overarching theme here. Consider the accommodations that you use for your newcomers, right? Our babies that have the most pronounced language barriers. Consider which of those accommodations might now be appropriate for all of our students as we meet the challenges of COVID, thinking about how much context is being lost either because we have a mask on or because our kids are watching us through a computer screen. So I know that was super fast and furious. Hopefully you got a lot of ideas. So I'm going to turn it back over to my lovely colleagues. And I believe Valentina or Anna is going to bring us home. Maybe? Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Michelle, for all of that. Everybody was so interacting and just loving what you had to say. So if you have any questions for Michelle, let us know. But I'm going to, for the sake of time, just move forward. If you want more of Michelle, I love this slide, more Michelle, you have plenty of opportunities to see her speak coming up in the next 6 weeks or so. She's doing 2 online conferences in November. You can see the dates on there. The first one is November 3rd and 5th, and then another one because on November 7th. So to be able to join those opportunities, you just go to our website, sidelitseducation.com, click on upcoming events, and you can find out more for us there.
Can I show you that slide as well? Because that's the QR codes for those if you want that.
Well, sure. Why
Look at
not?
that.
If you're
There
a
you go.
QR coded person, you can go ahead and take a quick second and do that.
And then can you just quickly mention the Saddleback webinar is on the 5th, November 5th.
Okay.
And it's sort of a continuation of what we just talked about. It's about assessing children during this particular moment in history, right?
Absolutely, which is so, so very important. If you would go on to your next slide. Now, from a Sidelets education standpoint, because again, we love, love, love telling you what we have going on. You can see on the screen a couple of our upcoming conferences. One is actually this Friday, our founding, what am I trying to say? Our fearless leader. There we go. Haven't done this in a while. Our fearless leader is going to be doing a webinar on Sidelets Education's latest product, which is the administrator's book. So what do we do to help our EL leaders, our coaches, our instructional specialists, our administrators during this time? And he's doing that alongside with Mary Martin. And there's still spots left if that is something that you're able to attend. And then towards the end of the month, Natalia Heckman is doing a conference on teaching writing to English learners. Something very exciting, if you take a look at the third one, our dear Valentina Gonzalez has the premiere of her very first book coming up as well towards the end of the month in October. Was it the 28th? I'm so sorry. I can't read it that way. It's the 28th. It's 3 days before Halloween. And this is reading and writing for English learners. It's such a beautiful book. And we very much encourage you all to join us. We're actually going to be giving away a couple of those books. So if you definitely want to tune in to get a chance to win. And then the final opportunity that you see here is something new that we're doing at Sidelets Education. This is an actual online course that Allison Hand is going to be leading, and it utilizes our book on sheltered instruction in Texas. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. So I definitely encourage you to check out our website for more on that. If you would proceed to the next slide, Michelle. Yes, we're all excited for Valentina's book. It's going to be great. Now, if you're new to Sidelets Education, we do a Twitter chat 2 times a month, and it's always on Tuesday. So you can see on this slide that we actually have one tonight. It's very brief, but powerful. It's 7 to 7:30 Central, and we have a rotating array of authors and Sidelets consultants and outside influencers in the field of education that join us for topics that are very relevant to our educational worlds right now. So we would love for you to join us. The hashtag is SideletsEdChat. Again, that's the first and third Tuesday of the month. And with that, let's see what else we have for you. There we go. We are done. You can see all of our social media information there on your screen, and you will be getting a recording of this presentation as well as a copy of Michelle's slides. Now, Michelle is incredibly, incredibly open to questions, comments, feedback. She wants to hear from you. Some of those questions that we didn't get a chance to go over, you did have a couple of Michelle, but for the sake of everybody's time right now, we know a lot of you have to run. We didn't get to them, but please, please, please reach out to her. Also, if you're in the market for training for your school district, Michelle is available to do that virtually and in person. She will risk your life, her life for you. Get on that Southwest plane with her mask to go do that. So again, thank you everyone so much for joining us on this Tuesday afternoon. Your support is what keeps us going, and we love doing this for you. So we hope you're all doing well, staying safe. Please go vote. I feel like I'm closing out the Oscars as your host.
The music is playing. No, I'm just kidding. But I did put my
Yeah,
email, Anna.
I'm not done yet. I haven't thanked my mom.
I know.
But
I'd like to thank my mom. I just put my email. I know some of you were asking about adapting a text. I didn't get to read all the comments, but please shoot me an email. I will send you anything I had. And I didn't get a chance to scroll through all the comments, but hi, Corey. I love you. And I was actually thinking about you and tofu yesterday. Kid you not. Text you later. Love ya.
Wonderful. Good, good, good. Thank you, everyone, so much. So much. We hope you have a great afternoon.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.